The candle on table 7 had been burning for exactly 11 minutes when Dante Vitale walked through the door. Sofia Romano noticed him the moment he stepped inside, not because he was handsome, though he was, in the way that old stone churches are handsome, carved, cold, built to last through storms. She noticed him because every single person in the restaurant went quiet when he entered. Not the polite quiet of a busy dining room catching a brief pause, the deep, held-breath quiet of people who instinctively understood that the wrong words spoken near this man could end badly. He wore a dark grey suit, no tie, a single silver watch on his left wrist. 2 large men followed him inside and positioned themselves near the entrance without being asked, the way shadows follow without needing instruction. Sofia wiped her hands on her apron and crossed the floor. "Mr. Vitale," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Table 7, as always." He looked at her then, really looked, the way people rarely did anymore. His eyes were dark and unhurried, like someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by anything the world offered. "You're not Enzo," he said. "My grandfather retired 6 months ago." She held his gaze. "I'm Sofia. I run the restaurant now." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, exactly. More like recognition of an unexpected fact. He nodded once and followed her to the table without another word. She had known about Dante Vitale the same way everyone in the valley knew, through whispers passed between tables, through the way the older staff lowered their voices whenever his name came up, through the single framed photograph her grandfather kept hidden in the back office that she wasn't supposed to find. She had found it at age 14. She had never asked about it. What she didn't know, what she had never been able to figure out, was why he came. Every year, same date, same table, same quiet dinner alone, ordering the lamb and a glass of the house red, leaving generous payment in cash, and departing before the kitchen closed. Her grandfather had always handled it personally. Now it fell to her. She brought his wine first. He didn't look at the menu. "Lamb," he said simply. "Of course." She was halfway back to the kitchen when her eye caught something outside the tall front windows. A dark van parked across the narrow road with its engine still running, then another, further along the curve of the driveway, then a third, tucked behind the old stone wall near the garden gate. 3 vans, no logos, no movement from inside. Her stomach tightened. She kept walking, calmly, without changing her pace, through the kitchen door and directly to the old electrical panel mounted on the back wall beside the cold storage room. Her grandfather had shown her the switches years ago. She had always assumed it was the kind of thing grandparents did. Old safety instructions, emergency protocols, stories from harder times. She had never once imagined she would actually use them. "The first switch kills the outdoor lights," he had told her, guiding her small hand along the metal panel. "The second drops the steel shutters on the windows and doors. The third opens the floor." She had laughed at that last part. Opens the floor. She wasn't laughing now. She looked back through the small kitchen window into the dining room. 14 guests, 2 families with children near the fireplace, an elderly couple celebrating something. There was a small cake on the table she hadn't delivered yet. 3 businessmen near the bar. Dante Vitale at table 7, cutting his bread with careful, deliberate movements. She looked back at the panel, then back at the vans. The first gunshot settled the question for her. It came from outside, a sharp crack that punched through the autumn air and shattered the large front window. Guests screamed and dropped. Dante was already moving before the glass finished falling, overturning his table in one motion and pulling a weapon from inside his jacket that Sofia had not known he was carrying. His 2 guards drew simultaneously and pushed toward the windows. Sophia didn't hesitate. She hit the first switch. The outdoor lights died, plunging the garden and driveway into pure black. She hit the second switch. Steel shutters, old, heavy, built into the walls decades before she was born, rolled down over every window and the front entrance with a grinding mechanical sound that her grandfather had apparently oiled regularly because they moved faster than she expected. The gunfire outside intensified for a moment, then faltered. The attackers hadn't expected armor. Sophia grabbed the radio clipped to her apron. "Kitchen staff, everyone into the back hallway, now, move!" Then she walked back into the dining room, stepping over broken glass, her heart slamming against her ribs with a ferocity that surprised her. She kept her face composed. "Everyone listen to me," she said, loud and clear, over the crying and the murmuring. "There is a safe way out of this building. I need you to stand up, stay close, and follow me. Do not stop. Do not look back." Dante was watching her from across the room. His guards looked at him. He gave them a small nod. She hit the third switch. Beneath the wine cellar's old stone floor, a panel shifted and dropped, revealing a narrow staircase descending into the dark. A smell of cool earth and old wood rose up from below, the smell of something that had been waiting underground for a very long time. Sophia grabbed a torch from the emergency bracket on the wall, clicked it on, and stepped onto the first stair. "Follow me," she said, and every single person in that restaurant followed her down. The tunnel smelled like rain and old stone and secrets. Sophia moved quickly, torch held ahead of her, counting heads as she walked. 14 guests, 4 kitchen staff, Dante and his 2 guards at the rear, watching behind them for any sign that Bellini's men had found the entrance. Nobody spoke. Everyone seemed to understand instinctively that silence was the only currency worth spending right now. The passage ran for nearly 400 meters beneath the vineyard before opening into a shallow embankment at the edge of the forest. Sophia had found the exit once, purely by accident, while chasing a cat through the back fields. Her grandfather had found her sitting on the embankment looking confused and had simply said, "Now you know." He had never explained further. She was beginning to understand that her grandfather had never explained a great many things. Once everyone was out and moving into the tree line, Sophia counted heads again. All present. She directed the families toward the eastern road where the forest thinned enough for phone signal, told the eldest kitchen staff member to call emergency services, and watched the small, frightened group disappear between the trees. Then she turned around. Dante was standing directly behind her, closer than she expected. His guards flanked him a few steps back, scanning the darkness. "The tunnel," he said quietly. "Your grandfather built it." "Apparently." She crossed her arms against the cold. "Along with the shutters, the hidden switches, and an escape route no one thought to mention to me until he handed me the keys and said good luck." She paused. "You knew about it, didn't you?" He didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer. "Who were those men?" she asked. "People who want something they believe I have." "And do you?" Again, that pause. Controlled, deliberate. The pause of a man who had spent decades choosing every word like a chess move. "Not yet," he said. She stared at him. In the distance, through the trees, she could see orange light flickering against the night sky where the restaurant stood. Her stomach dropped slowly, like a stone through deep water. She had grown up in that building. She had learned to walk between those tables. Her grandmother had died in the small room above the kitchen, and her grandfather had kept working the very next morning because he said the restaurant was the only thing that kept grief from winning. And now it was burning. She turned away so Dante wouldn't see her face. He gave her a moment, just one, before speaking again. "You'll come to my estate tonight. It isn't a request, but it also isn't a threat. Until I understand who organized this and how they knew I'd be here tonight, you're not safe anywhere connected to that building or to me." "I don't even know why you're connected to that building," she said, turning back. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. A door closed quietly somewhere deep inside him. "Get some rest tonight," he said. "We'll talk in the morning." They did not talk in the morning, or the morning after that. Dante's estate sat outside the city on a long, private road lined with cypress trees that looked like they'd been standing since Roman times. The house itself was enormous and aggressively quiet, the kind of quiet that comes not from emptiness, but from discipline. Staff moved through the corridors without sound. Doors closed softly. Even the clocks seemed to tick more carefully here. Sophia was given a room on the second floor, with a view of formal gardens and a locked gate beyond them. Comfortable, private, and impossible to leave without someone noticing. She spent the first 2 days restless and irritable, waiting for answers that didn't come. Dante was present at meals and absent everywhere else, moving through his own house like a man with 1,000 things happening simultaneously behind his eyes. On the third day, something unexpected made her stop. She was passing the estate's administrative office when she overheard Dante on the phone, speaking in a low voice. She didn't catch everything, but she caught enough. He was paying her restaurant staff. Not severance, full salaries. Every single employee. The kitchen porter who'd worked there since before Sophia was born, the young waitress who'd only started 2 months ago, the old man who maintained the garden on weekend mornings. All of them, continuing to receive their wages as though the restaurant were still open. From his personal account, without telling anyone. She stepped back from the doorway and stood very still in the corridor for a long moment. That evening, she found the journal. It was tucked inside a box of her grandfather's belongings that the insurance investigator had recovered from the undamaged portion of the cellar. Old leather cover, pages slightly yellowed at the edges, and a brass lock on the front that was small and unusual and shaped unlike any keyhole she had ever seen. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a cloth, was a brass key. She tried it. It didn't fit. She sat on the edge of the bed holding both objects, the locked journal and the useless key, and stared at them until the room went dark around her. Somewhere in this story, she thought, there's a door I haven't found yet. The journal was useless without the right key, but the wrong key told her something important. Sophia turned the brass piece over in her fingers for the 3rd night in a row, studying it under the lamp. It was too small for a door, too large for a jewelry box. The teeth were unusual, asymmetrical, almost like a code rather than a simple mechanism. Her grandfather had been a practical man. He didn't own things without purpose, which meant the door this key opened wasn't one she had found yet. She opened the journal the only way she could, carefully prying the brass lock mechanism with a hairpin until it gave with a soft, reluctant click that felt almost like a sigh. The pages were dense with her grandfather's handwriting, small and slanted, mixing Italian with dialect words she had to read twice to understand. Most of it was ordinary, supply records, staff notes, seasonal menus stretching back decades, but tucked between pages dated 25 years ago were hand-drawn maps, not of the restaurant above ground, of what was beneath it. She went to Dante that same night. He was in his study, jacket off, reading something he closed without hurrying when she entered. She dropped the open journal on the desk in front of him and watched his face. He looked at the maps for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "You picked the lock," he said. "You stopped answering my questions," she replied. "We need to go back to the restaurant, tonight, before whoever attacked us decides to start digging." Something shifted in his expression. That same door closing again, except this time it didn't close all the way. He looked at the maps once more, then stood without another word and reached for his jacket. 2 hours, he said. "We leave in 2 hours." They went with only one guard, a quiet man named Enzo, who shared her grandfather's name and seemed to operate entirely without nerves. Dante drove himself, which surprised her. She had assumed men like him were always passengers. The restaurant looked worse in person than she had imagined from a distance. The front half of the building had taken the most damage. Walls blackened, the beautiful old wooden entrance completely gone, the stone archway her grandfather had restored by hand standing alone like a gravestone. But the back section, the wine cellar and the kitchen below, had survived largely intact, protected by the same thick stone walls that had kept the building standing through 2 actual wars. They moved fast and without lights, using only a single torch aimed low at the ground. Sophia navigated from memory and from the maps, counting steps through the cellar the way her grandfather had once counted them aloud to her as a game, pretending they were pirates hunting buried treasure. She stopped at the far wall, behind the oldest wine rack, a heavy iron structure bolted to the stone that had always seemed too permanent, too deliberately placed for something that only held bottles. "Help me with this," she said. It took all 3 of them. The rack swung outward on a hidden hinge, smooth and counterweighted in a way that confirmed someone had engineered this with great care. Behind it, set into the stone, was a low door with a lock she recognized immediately. The same asymmetrical keyhole. Her hands were steady as she inserted the brass key. This time, it turned. The chamber beyond was small, perhaps 4 meters by 4, with a low ceiling and walls of dry, undressed stone. It smelled of sealed air and time. A single metal shelf ran along the back wall, and on it sat stacked bundles of documents, rolled maps tied with ribbon, a cardboard box of photographs, and at the center, a sealed metal case about the size of a briefcase, dull silver and fastened with 2 combination locks. Sophia stepped inside and stood very still. 25 years. This room had sat untouched for 25 years, while her grandfather served lamb and poured wine and smiled at customers above it. She reached for the photographs first. She recognized her grandfather immediately, younger, thinner, more serious than she had ever seen him in life. Beside him, in several photographs, stood a man she didn't recognize and a woman she almost didn't recognize, because the last time she had seen that face, it had been in a small framed picture on her grandmother's bedside table. Her mother. Her throat tightened. Dante was beside her now, looking at the same photographs. His expression had changed completely. The careful blankness was gone, replaced by something old and heavy that he clearly hadn't planned on showing her. She turned to ask him what he knew, and the torch went out. Not a flicker, not a fade. Someone had finished the power to the cellar from above. Dante grabbed her arm in the darkness.
"They're here," he said quietly. "Take the case, leave everything else."
She grabbed it blindly, both hands, heavy, solid. Whatever was inside pressed against the metal walls without shifting. They moved through the dark from memory. Her memory, because she had counted every step on the way in without realizing she was doing it, the same habit her grandfather had built into her like a second instinct. Behind them, she could hear boots on stone, getting closer. They ran. Not blindly. Sophia ran with the particular focus of someone who had spent her childhood treating this building like a playground, who knew which step in the cellar staircase creaked on the left side but held firm on the right, who knew the back passage through the kitchen connected to the same tunnel system they had used the night of the attack. Dante followed without question, which told her something about him she filed away for later. The guard, Enzo, covered their rear, moving backwards through the dark with a professional calm that Sophia found both reassuring and faintly terrifying. They burst out through the tunnel exit into the cold night air and kept moving, across the open field at a low run, into the vineyard rows where the dead winter vines gave just enough cover, then down the slope toward the river crossing where Dante had parked the car an hour earlier under a stand of trees. Behind them,
Flashlight beams swept the field from the direction of the restaurant. Voices carried on the cold air, sharp, organized, methodical. These weren't panicked men. They were searching the way people search when they know exactly what they're looking for. They reached the car. Dante started the engine without headlights and rolled slowly along the riverbank until the ground firmed into a gravel track, then accelerated into the dark. Nobody spoke until the lights of the city appeared on the horizon. Back at the estate, Sophia sat at the long kitchen table with the metal case in front of her, while Dante worked the combination locks with a slim tool from his desk drawer. Enzo stood by the window. Nobody had suggested sleep. The locks gave after 8 minutes. Inside, packed tightly in a waterproof sleeve, were letters. Not documents, not evidence files, not maps or legal records. Letters. Personal ones, handwritten on plain paper in 2 different sets of handwriting. One she recognized immediately as her father's, careful and slightly formal, the way he had always written even grocery lists. The other handwriting was different, broader strokes, more impatient. She looked at Dante. He was already looking at her. "That's your handwriting," she said, not a question. He pulled a chair out and sat down across from her. For the first time since she had met him 4 days ago, he looked like a man who had run out of reasons to delay an honest conversation. "Yes," he said. She read slowly. Dante didn't rush her. The letters spanned nearly 3 years, beginning when Sophia was barely 2 years old. Her father's first letter was careful and formal, the letter of a man approaching someone dangerous with great deliberateness, the way you might approach a fire you needed but didn't fully trust. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for protection for himself. He was asking Dante to look the other way. Her father, it turned out, had been quietly doing something extraordinary and entirely unofficial, building an informal network that helped ordinary families escape Bellini's territory. Not dramatically, not violently. Paperwork filed in the right places, drivers arranged, properties quietly purchased under names Bellini wouldn't recognize. Small, careful acts repeated hundreds of times across several years. He had never carried a weapon. He had never attended a meeting with men like Dante. He existed in the spaces between worlds, doing what he could with what he had. And he had been terrified that Dante would one day view his activities as interference.
Dante's replies were short, direct, and completely unexpected. "I am aware of what you are doing. I have been aware for some time. You have my word that my people will not interfere. Do not mistake my silence for ignorance. Mistake it for a choice." The correspondence continued. Gradually, reluctantly, the tone shifted from cautious strangers to something closer to mutual respect, the kind that grows between people who disagree about many things, but agree about the ones that matter. The final letter from her father was dated 2 weeks before her parents disappeared. Sophia's hands slowed as she read it. "Dante, I believe Bellini knows. I don't know how, but the signs are there. I am not writing to ask you to intervene. I know what that would cost, and I won't ask it. I am writing to ask for one promise only. If anything happens to us, protect the restaurant. Keep it alive, whatever it costs you. One day, my daughter will need what's buried beneath it. She doesn't know it yet, but she will." The room was very quiet. Sophia set the letter down on the table and stared at it for a long moment, her jaw tight, her eyes dry in the way that eyes go dry when the feeling is too large to become tears immediately. "You kept it alive," she said finally. "All these years, the accounts, the repairs, the supplies, that was you." "Yes." "He asked you once, in a letter, and you did it for 25 years without telling anyone." Dante said nothing. He didn't offer it as something noble. He didn't frame it as a sacrifice. He simply sat across from her with the steady patience of a man who had quietly carried something heavy for a very long time and had never expected to be thanked for it. Sophia looked at him, really looked, the way she hadn't let herself until now, and for the first time since this began, she stopped waiting for him to become the man she had expected him to be. The morning after reading the letters, Sophia did something she hadn't done in 3 days. She called her uncle. Victor Romano was her father's older brother, a careful, well-dressed man who had built a modest property business in the years following her parents' disappearance and now lived in a large house on the edge of the city with a housekeeper and a collection of antique clocks that he polished every Sunday. He had always been kind to Sophia in a distant, slightly formal way. Birthday cards arrived on time. He attended her graduation. When her grandfather retired, Victor had offered to help with the restaurant's legal paperwork without being asked. He was, by every visible measure, a decent man. He answered on the second ring. "Sophia." His voice carried immediate relief. "I heard about the restaurant. I've been trying to reach you for days. Are you safe?" "I'm safe," she said. "I'm staying with someone while the investigation continues." A brief pause. "Who?" "A contact of grandfather's." She kept it vague deliberately, watching her own instincts the way Dante had quietly taught her to do, simply by example. "Victor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course." "After my parents disappeared, you inherited most of the family property. The land, the northern house, the accounts." She kept her voice even. "Did anyone help make that happen?" The pause this time was half a second longer than it should have been. "Sophia, that was handled entirely through the courts. Everything was completely legitimate. I can show you the paperwork if—" "That wasn't what I asked." Silence. "I'll come to you," he said finally. "We should speak in person, not over the phone." "I'll be in touch," she said, and ended the call. She stared at the phone in her hand for a moment. Then she went to find Dante. She found him in the study with 2 of his senior men, looking at a city map spread across the desk with several locations marked in red ink. He glanced up when she entered and read her expression immediately.
"Sit down," he said to her, and to his men. "Give us a moment." They cleared the room without hesitation. "My uncle is hiding something," Sophia said. She relayed the conversation precisely, the pauses included, the slight shift in his voice when she had pushed past the surface answer. Dante listened without interrupting, which she had come to understand was how he listened to everything, completely, storing each detail the way a library stores books, quietly and permanently. When she finished, he was still for a moment. "Victor Romano," he said slowly, as if tasting the name for the first time. "He inherited everything neatly and quickly after your parents vanished." "Yes." "And he's never remarried, never expanded his business significantly, never drawn attention to himself." Dante looked at the map. "A man sitting very carefully on top of something he doesn't want to disturb." "You already suspected him," Sophia said. "I suspected the inheritance was too clean," Dante said. "I didn't know who facilitated it. Now I have a better idea." He didn't elaborate. He crossed to the window and stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the cypress trees along the drive. Sophia had noticed he did this when he was thinking, positioned himself near windows the way other people positioned themselves near doors, always watching what was outside. "Don't contact him again," Dante said. "Not yet." Victor Romano contacted Bellini within the hour. He didn't do it proudly. He sat in the small back office of his property firm with the door locked and his hands not quite steady, and told Bellini's intermediary that Sophia was alive, that she was under Dante Vitale's protection, and that she had recovered the metal case from beneath the restaurant. He told himself, as he had been telling himself for 20 years, that he was only trying to manage the situation, that feeding Bellini small truths kept larger disasters from happening, that it was damage control, not betrayal. He had been telling himself this lie for so long that he almost believed it had a different name. Bellini moved the same night.
Not toward Dante's estate. He wasn't foolish enough to attempt that twice. Instead, his men picked up Victor Romano himself, quietly, from the parking garage beneath his office building at 9:30 in the evening. Victor didn't struggle. He had, on some level, been waiting for this moment for 20 years. They drove him to a warehouse on the city's industrial edge and sat him in a chair under a single hanging light, with Bellini standing across from him. And Bellini asked him one simple question. "Where is the rest of the evidence?" Victor told him he didn't know. Bellini asked again. After the third time, Victor told him the truth about something else entirely, something he had never told anyone, something that had lived inside him like a stone in still water, heavy and permanent, and slowly pulling him under. 20 years ago, he had told Bellini which road Sofia's parents would be traveling on. He had believed they would only be frightened, warned, turned back. He had not believed, had refused to believe, that Bellini would have them finsage. He had been wrong. And he had been paying for that wrongness every single day since, in the private currency of a guilt that never once let him sleep past 4 in the morning. Bellini looked at him for a long moment after this confession. Then he said, "Good. Now you're going to help me finish it." Dante learned about Victor's abduction at 6 in the morning. He came to Sofia's room and knocked twice, not urgently, which somehow made it worse. Urgent knocking meant a problem. 2 calm knocks meant a situation that had already moved past the point where urgency was useful. She opened the door, already dressed. She hadn't slept. "Bellini has your uncle," he said. She absorbed this without flinching, which surprised her. A week ago, the news would have collapsed her. Now it landed differently, not without pain, but without confusion. The shape of things was becoming clearer, and clarity, she was learning, was a complicated gift. It steadied you and broke you at the same time. "Is he alive?" she asked. "Yes. For now, Bellini needs him cooperative, not dead." Dante paused. "Victor contacted Bellini after your phone call yesterday. He told him about the case." The words arrived quietly and hit hard. Sofia turned away from the door and walked to the window. Outside, the garden was silver and still in the early morning light. She stood there long enough that Dante didn't fill the silence, which she appreciated more than she could have explained. "My parents trusted him," she said finally. "Yes." "And he—" She stopped, started again. "All those years at family dinners, at grandfather's table, he sat there knowing." "Yes." She turned back around. Her eyes were clear and her voice was steady, and Dante would later think that this was the moment he fully understood what Sofia Romano was made of. "Where do we start?" she said. Her father's letters contained more than sentiment. Folded carefully between several pages were small handwritten notes, names, addresses, dates, witnesses her father had trusted, people who had seen enough of Bellini's operation to confirm what he had documented. A quiet network of ordinary people scattered across the country who had been holding pieces of a larger truth for 25 years, waiting for someone to come and collect them. They started in the north. A retired schoolteacher in a small lakeside town who had helped 3 families relocate under her father's guidance. She answered the door in a cardigan and reading glasses and went pale the moment Sofia introduced herself. "You look exactly like her," the woman said, meaning Sofia's mother. She gave them everything she had, names, a date, a handwritten testimony she had prepared years ago, and kept in a sealed envelope she produced from beneath a floorboard with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had always expected this visit, just never known when it would come. She was the only one who opened her door without fear. The second name on the list was a retired port official in Genoa. When they arrived, his neighbor told them he had moved away 3 weeks ago without leaving a forwarding address. The apartment had been cleared professionally, not quickly, professionally, the kind of empty that takes planning. Dante stood in the bare hallway and said nothing.
Sophia wrote the name in her notebook with a small mark beside it. Gone. The third was a former municipal clerk in a hill town outside Florence, a wiry old man named Caruso who met them in a bar, sat with his back to the wall, and spoke in a voice just loud enough to be heard over the espresso machine. He told them that 2 men had visited him the previous month, asking questions about events from 25 years ago. He had told them nothing. But the visit itself told Sophia something important. Bellini had been working through the same list, systematically, for weeks, possibly longer. He's not just covering his past, Dante said as they walked back to the car. He's preparing for something. You don't erase witnesses unless you're about to do something that makes the past relevant again. The documents from the vault, Sophia said. If they reach the right authorities, they implicate people who are still powerful, still operating. He opened the car door. Bellini has spent 25 years building a legitimate face over everything he did. Those documents don't just threaten him, they destroy him completely. They moved through 4 cities in 6 days. Some witnesses gave them fragments, a name, a date, a single detail that connected to something else in the letters like puzzle pieces drawn from different boxes. Some were dead. One had been dead for a decade, his testimony buried with him.
Another had been relocated by Bellini's people so thoroughly that even Dante's network couldn't immediately find him. But the picture assembling itself from the fragments was becoming undeniable. Bellini hadn't simply ordered the death of Sophia's parents to protect his operation. He had been doing something far larger, far colder, something that made the finishing of 2 people look almost incidental in comparison. Sophia felt it building in the evidence the way you feel weather building before it arrives, a pressure change, a shift in the light. At night, in small hotels and borrowed safe houses, she and Dante fell into a quiet routine that neither of them named or examined too closely. Coffee shared before the day began. Long silences in the car that were different from awkward silences, inhabited ones. His jacket placed over her shoulders once without comment when the mountain air turned sharp. Her hand briefly covering his on the table when a witness confirmed the worst. Neither spoke about it. Both noticed everything. The retired judge's name was Ferraro. He didn't exist anymore, not officially. The man who had once presided over some of the most sensitive criminal proceedings in the country's recent history now lived under a different name in a coastal town so small it appeared on maps only as a dot with no label. He had been hiding for 11 years, not from any single threat, from the accumulated weight of everything he knew. Sophia found him through the schoolteacher from the lake town, who had given them his location in a whisper as they were leaving, pressing a folded slip of paper into Sophia's hand like a woman passing a note she had been holding too long. "He knows everything," she had said, "but he'll run if he sees strangers coming. Go slowly. Go alone." They drove south toward the coast on a Tuesday morning, the sea appearing in fragments between cliffs and olive groves as the road descended. Dante navigated without a map, which no longer surprised Sophia. She had stopped being surprised by what he knew. "What did Ferraro preside over?" she asked. 3 cases, 26 years ago, involving Bellini's early operations, money movements, disappeared assets. 2 of the defendants cooperated with investigators. Dante paused. Both died before sentencing. The cases collapsed. And Ferraro? Retired early, officially for health reasons. He glanced at her briefly. He was 39 years old. Sophia looked out at the sea. "He ran," she said. "He survived," Dante replied. The distinction, coming from him, carried considerable weight. The town was beautiful in the way that forgotten places often are, unhurried, slightly salt-worn, built for permanence rather than visitors. A single harbor, a church with a cracked bell tower, a bar that opened at 7 and closed whenever the last customer left. They found the man who called himself Marchetti tending a small boat at the harbor's edge. He was thin and deeply tanned,
with white hair and the careful eyes of someone who had spent over a decade monitoring every approaching face for signs of danger. He saw them when they were still 30 meters away. He didn't run immediately, which meant the schoolteacher's warning had helped. But his hand moved to the rope at his side, and his body shifted toward the water with the specific readiness of a man calculating options. Dante stopped walking. He held up both hands, empty, and simply waited. It was Sophia who kept moving forward alone, slowly, as the schoolteacher had instructed, stopping at a comfortable distance with the morning sun behind her. "My name is Sophia Romano," she said. "My father was Antonio Romano." The old judge went very still. "He spoke about you," Sophia continued. "Not by name, but I've been reading his letters for a week, and I understand now what he was doing and why. I'm not here on behalf of anyone who wants to harm you.
I'm here because I think you've been waiting 11 years for someone to finally come and ask the right questions." Ferraro looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Dante, still standing 30 meters back with his hands visible. "Is that Vitale?" he said.
"Yes," Sophia said.
Another long pause. The sea moved quietly against the harbor wall.
"Come inside," Ferraro said. He made coffee without asking if they wanted any, and set out 3 cups on a small kitchen table with the automatic hospitality of a man who had once entertained frequently and now entertained no one. His hands were steady. His voice, when he began, was the voice of someone releasing a pressure that had been building for a very long time. He spoke for nearly 2 hours. Sophia took notes. Dante listened without moving. What Ferraro described was not a single crime, but an architecture. A deliberate, patient, sophisticated construction built over years. Bellini had not simply finished people, or moved money, or intimidated rivals. He had done something far more calculated. He had started wars. Not openly, never openly. Through careful manipulation. Anonymous information fed to competing families about betrayals that hadn't happened. Evidence planted. Meetings arranged under false pretenses. Alliances broken by whispers rather than weapons. Family after family had turned on each other over the course of nearly a decade, burning through resources and loyalty and blood. All while Bellini stood at a careful distance, watching, and then moved in afterward to purchase the weakened businesses, the abandoned land, the collapsed operations, at devastating discounts. Sophia's parents hadn't died because they were threatening Bellini's criminal activities specifically. They had died because they had discovered the blueprint, the actual documented proof of every manipulation, every planted lie, every manufactured war. They had gathered it carefully and hidden it in the only place they could think of that was completely unremarkable. A countryside restaurant, where a mafia boss would visit quietly every year, not because of tradition, because he was guarding it. The realization arrived in Sophia's chest like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. She looked at Dante. He met her eyes, and she saw it confirmed there. The whole 25 years of it, the weight he had carried, not out of obligation, but out of something that had no clean name in his world. Then Ferraro's window exploded inward, and everything became noise. The first thing Dante did was pull Ferraro to the floor. The second thing Sophia did was overturn the kitchen table. Not because anyone told her to, not because she had been trained for moments like this, but because 6 days of moving through danger with Dante Vitale had quietly rewired her instincts in ways she hadn't noticed until this exact moment, when her body simply acted before her mind had finished processing the situation. The 3 of them pressed low against the overturned table, while glass and plaster dust settled around them. Outside, she could hear boots on the harbor cobblestones. More than 2 men, more than 4. Dante was already on his phone, 2 words spoken quietly, then silence. He looked at Sophia across the small space between them, and in that look was something she had never seen on his face before. Not fear, that was the wrong word for it. Something
older than fear, something that looked almost like apology. "Can you move?" he asked Ferraro. The old judge was bleeding from a small cut on his forearm from the window glass. He looked at it briefly, with the calm assessment of a man evaluating an inconvenient fact. "I've been ready to move for 11 years, he said. The next 40 minutes were the longest of Sofia's life.
They moved through the back of the house into a narrow service alley that ran behind the harbor buildings, Dante ahead, Sofia supporting Ferraro's arm, the sounds of Bellini's men spreading through the town behind them like water finding cracks. Enzo appeared at the alley's end, with the car already running. Dante's 2 calm words on the phone had been enough. They pushed Ferraro into the back seat, Sofia beside him, and drove out along the coast road at a speed that required concentration Sofia didn't have to spare. Behind them, 2 vehicles gave chase for nearly 12 kilometers before Enzo took a sequence of turns through agricultural backroads that Sofia suspected weren't on any digital map and lost them completely in the olive groves. Ferraro, to his considerable credit, didn't make a sound throughout any of it. When they finally stopped at a safe house an hour inland, a farmhouse Dante apparently owned under a name that wasn't his, the old judge sat down at the kitchen table, accepted a glass of water, and said, "I'd like to finish what I was saying, if you don't mind." He spoke for another hour. He gave them names, dates, case numbers from proceedings that had been officially closed but never genuinely resolved. He described evidence he had personally preserved, copies of documents he had made before his official retirement, stored with a notary in Rome under instructions to release them only upon his death or his explicit instruction. "I'll give the instruction," he said, looking at Sofia. "It's past time." Then he said the thing that reordered everything. "Bellini didn't just manipulate the families from the outside," Ferraro said, setting down his glass carefully. "He had someone inside Dante's organization, feeding him information for years. Someone close enough to know the anniversary visits, close enough to know about the restaurant." The room went very quiet. Sofia looked at Dante. He was looking at Ferraro with an expression she couldn't fully read, controlled, careful, and underneath the control, something sharp and cold being filed to a point. "Do you have a name?" Dante said. Ferraro reached into his shirt pocket and placed a folded piece of paper on the table. Dante looked at it for a moment without touching it. Then he picked it up, read it, and folded it again. His face gave nothing away, but his jaw tightened once, briefly, and Sofia understood that the name on the paper was someone he knew well, someone he had trusted. The next 72 hours moved with a precision that Sofia could only observe and not fully follow. Dante worked the phone, quietly, methodically, with the focused patience of a man dismantling something complicated that he couldn't afford to break in the wrong sequence. He made calls to men who led other families, men who had spent years treating each other as enemies because Bellini had spent years ensuring they would. He told them the truth, not with a speech, not with threats or leverage or the usual currencies of his world. He sent Ferraro's testimony. He sent the documents from the vault. He sent the names and the dates and the manufactured provocations, every false betrayal, every planted lie, every war Bellini had engineered from a careful distance while they destroyed each other. The responses came back within hours, one by one, then in groups. Bellini's support, the loyalty he had spent decades purchasing and maintaining, collapsed with a speed that seemed impossible until Sofia understood the reason. These men hadn't been loyal to Bellini. They had been loyal to a version of events he had constructed for them. Once the construction fell, there was nothing underneath it worth defending. By the 3rd day, Bellini had fewer than a dozen men still standing beside him, and he had one move left. He went back to the restaurant. Of course he did. The vault
was still there.
The remaining documents, the photographs, the rolled maps they hadn't been able to carry during the night chase, all of it still sat in the chamber beneath the wine cellar, and Bellini intended to destroy every piece of it before it could be used in any formal proceeding. Sofia understood this before Dante said it. She was already reaching for her jacket. "I know those passages better than any man he brought with him," she said. "Every turn, every junction, every dead end that looks like an exit." Dante looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said quietly. And then, with a weight behind it that carried everything the previous weeks had built between them, "That's exactly why you're coming with me." They arrived at the ruined restaurant under a sky going dark at the edges, the last light sitting flat and orange on the damaged stone walls. Bellini's vehicles were visible from the tree line, 3 of them carelessly parked, the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Dante's people took the perimeter quietly, efficiently, the way they did everything. Sofia took the passages. She moved through the underground network alone, torch off, navigating by touch and memory and the particular quality of the air in each section, the slight temperature drop near the junction, the change in floor texture before the chamber door, the faint sound of movement somewhere ahead that told her exactly where Bellini's men had gone and, more importantly, where they hadn't. She sealed 3 exits from the inside before they realized what was happening. When Bellini finally understood that the passages were closing around him, he turned back toward the vault and found Sofia standing in the entrance to the chamber with a torch held level and steady, blocking the only remaining way in or out. He was a tall man, Bellini, broad across the shoulders, the face of someone who had spent 50 years being the most dangerous person in every room he entered. He looked at her with genuine surprise, which was, Sofia thought, exactly how a man like that should meet the end of everything he'd built. "My grandfather designed these passages," she said calmly. "I grew up in them. You have nowhere left to go." Behind him, Dante's voice came from the dark. "It's finished, Marco." Bellini went still. The fight left him, not dramatically, but practically, the way a fire goes out when the oxygen is finally cut off. He understood the geometry of his situation. Surrounded below ground by passages he didn't know, by a woman who knew every inch of them, with Dante behind him and his own men gone silent above. He put his hands up. The trial lasted 4 months. Sofia attended every session. Not because she was required to. She had given her testimony in the 3rd week and was legally free to step away after that. She attended because she had spent her entire life being kept outside the truth of her own story, and she had decided, quietly and permanently, that she was done with being kept outside of anything. Bellini's legal team was expensive and skilled, and ultimately useless. Ferraro's testimony alone would have been sufficient. Combined with the vault documents, the letters, the witness accounts collected across 6 cities, and the testimony of 3 family heads who had finally understood the scope of what had been done to them, the case assembled itself with the terrible clarity of something that had always been true and was simply now, finally, visible. The judge read the verdict on a gray Thursday morning. Sofia sat in the 3rd row and felt nothing dramatic when it came. No flood of relief, no collapse of tension, just a quiet settling, like a building finding its foundation after years of subsidence, something underground shifting back into its proper place. Bellini was taken from the courtroom without looking at her. She hadn't expected him to. Men like that, she had learned, looked at their own reflections until the very end. Victor came to her 3 weeks after the verdict. He didn't call ahead. He simply appeared at the door of the temporary apartment she was renting near the old neighborhood, hat in hand in the most literal sense, looking 10 years older than he had the last time she had seen him. She let him in because she had already decided she would, long before he arrived. He sat at her small kitchen table and told her everything from the beginning. The full account, without softening or self-justification, in the flat, exhausted voice of a man who had rehearsed this confession so many times, across so many sleepless mornings,
that the words had worn smooth. He had told Bellini the route. He had believed it would only be a warning. He had been wrong. He had known he was wrong by the following morning, and had carried that wrongness inside him every day since, like a wound that wouldn't close because he had never allowed it to. Sophia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not going to tell you I forgive you," she said finally. "Not today. Maybe not for a long time. But I understand the difference between a man who made a terrible choice and a man who is a terrible person." She looked at him steadily. "You're going to stand up publicly and tell the truth about your role. All of it. Not in a lawyer's office, in front of people." Victor nodded without hesitation. "Yes," he said. "I know." He did exactly that 2 weeks later at a press conference his own lawyer advised him against. He accepted full civil responsibility for his role in the events surrounding his brother's death. He signed over the properties he had inherited to a foundation established in Sophia's parents' names. He wept once, briefly, and did not hide it. Sophia watched from the back of the room. She did not hold his hand, but she did not leave either. The restaurant took 8 months to rebuild. Sophia oversaw every decision personally, not obsessively, but with the particular attention of someone who understands that the details of a place carry its meaning. The original stone walls were preserved where possible. The iron wine rack was reinstalled on its hidden hinge, the chamber beneath it sealed now, but documented, its existence acknowledged rather than hidden. Her grandfather came back for the final 2 weeks of work. He walked through the rebuilt rooms slowly, touching walls and door frames with his fingertips, the way you touch something you weren't sure you'd see again. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. On the last evening before the opening, he sat at table 7 with a glass of the house red and looked at Sophia across the room. "Your father would have been proud," he said. She had been holding that sentence in reserve for herself for months, and hearing it aloud was different from imagining it. Her eyes went bright for a moment. She let them. Dante came back on the anniversary. The date that had brought him to the restaurant every year for 25 years arrived on a warm evening in early autumn, the kind of evening where the air smells of turned earth and something distant burning, harvest fires in the fields beyond the vineyard. He was not the same man who had walked through the door last year, or rather, he was the same man, but differently arranged. The estate outside the city ran now as a legitimate property and agricultural business. The remaining criminal operations had been quietly dissolved over the preceding months, handed off or shut down with the methodical patience he applied to everything. He had not done this dramatically. He had simply stopped. He walked through the restaurant door, and the room didn't go quiet this time. People nodded. Someone raised a glass, which was, perhaps, the finest thing that had ever happened to Dante Vitale. Sophia came to meet him at the entrance. She was wearing the same apron she had worn the night everything began, which was either a coincidence or wasn't. And with Sophia, he had learned that very few things were coincidences. "Table 7?" she said. "Not tonight," he said. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced something small. Not a weapon, not a phone, not any of the things that had historically come from that pocket. A ring. Simple, old, a band of dark gold that had belonged to his mother and had waited in a drawer for 30 years for a moment worthy of it. He didn't get down on one knee. That wasn't who either of them were. He simply held it between them in the warm light of the restored restaurant, with the smell of good food and old stone around them, and he looked at her the way he had been looking at her since a night in the forest when she had guided 14 frightened strangers through the dark without a single tremor in her voice. "I made a promise to your father," he said quietly. "I kept it for 25 years. Now I'd like to make one to you, if you'll let me." Sophia looked at the ring, then at him. Outside, the fields were golden in the last of the evening light.
The restaurant that had buried secrets and survived fire and carried the weight of 25 years of grief was full of people eating and laughing and living, which was the only thing it had ever really been built for. "You're going to be very bad at taking nights off," she said. "Probably," he admitted. She took the ring, and the restaurant, which had once hidden everything that mattered, now held something it had never held in all its long and complicated life. A beginning.